Alright guys, welcome back to the channel, and I am recording this for the fourth time because I am a huge dumbass. And oh man, I can't even believe my own dumbness sometimes. But anyway, moving on from that, we obviously got a shit ton of information about Assassin's Valhalla, and this particular video is going to focus just on the PC specs. Don't worry, I am going to make more videos on the other news that we did get. So stay tuned for all of that. Now, before going any further, I would just like to do this as quickly as possible. If you do end up enjoying the video, then please definitely press the like button and do subscribe to my channel for more content, because when this game comes out, I will be playing this game on my channel. If you can't actually play the game because you don't meet the PC settings, then I will be playing the game. Do come and watch my channel. Yeah, just moving on from that. As far as the minimum requirements go, there are some requirements that you need to know about. One, this game will only use DirectX 12. Which I would say is a good job. Good job there. I'm tired of using DirectX 11 in these games. But yeah, DirectX 12 is going to be used. So you need to have Windows 10 to actually run the game. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. Now moving to the minimum requirements. They are targeting 1080p 30 FPS with their lowest preset in the minimum requirements. And the GPU they actually recommend for that is AMD R9 3080 or GTX 960. So yeah, they are fine GPUs. My GPU actually is on par with a 960, so I know I can at least run the damn game. So I'm happy about that. As far as the CPU side is concerned, you need an AMD Ryzen 3 1200, so that's like very low end, which is new for this because usually Odyssey and Origins, they were pretty CPU bound, they were pretty CPU heavy. As far as the Intel side of it, you need a minimum of i5 4460. So yeah, keep that in mind. As far as the RAM is concerned, you need 8GB minimum, which in 2020, you need 8GB to game. As far as the operating system goes, yeah, Windows 10 64-bit only. That was a given, I already told you about it. As far as the storage goes, I guess now we know how big this game is going to be, because the recommended requirements is 50GB. And of course, they recommend an SSD, but you can still run this game on and from a standard hard drive. Now moving on to recommended requirements, and the target here is still 1080p 30 FPS, but with a higher preset, with the high preset. Now the GPU recommended for this is a RX 570 and a GTX 1060, which is fine. A GTX 1060 is a lot faster than my card, about 50% faster than my card. So yeah, I might be able to run this game on medium at 900p at a slightly higher frame FPS. So that is something I will look into. As I said before, a lot of content about Valhalla is coming, so stay tuned to my channel. As far as the CPU goes for recommended requirements, you need a Ryzen 5 1600, which I am assuming there is a slight bump here because the higher you go, maybe the geometry settings and all of that starts affecting the CPU, so you need a higher CPU clock to actually run these things. Maybe that's the case. So moving on to the RAM, OS and storage, they remain the same. Now we go on to the high preset. Now at high preset, 1080p 60 FPS, at high they are still targeting the high preset, but this time they moved to 60 FPS. Now for that you need a 1080 or an AMD Vega 64, which they were pricey cards when they came out, but honestly they are kind of old now, guys. So yeah, but I would still say these are pretty high requirements. For the CPU side of it, you need a Ryzen 7 1700, which, considering the amount of cores and threads it has, and if they are actually going for the multi-core, multi-threaded process for this, yeah, it's going to need a lot of CPU actually. And on the Intel side, you need a i7 6700. Again, not a bad CPU at all. RAM, OS and storage remains the exact same. Now we move on to the enthusiast part of it, and this is where things kind of get interesting. Now we move on to the very high preset, and the average performance being targeted here is 1440p 60 FPS. Now the GPU being used here, interestingly, is an RX 5700 XT. And on Nvidia's side, they actually recommend an RTX 2080 Super. So that's all well and nice. Both these cards are good, even though I would say a 5700 XT is not on the same level as a 2080 Super, but that's fine. Moving on to the CPU side of it, we see a noticeable bump as we move on to a Ryzen 5 3600X or an Intel i7 8700K. And what I want to say, it's probably because we moved from the high preset to a very high preset. Now, maybe again it has something to do with the geometry, and maybe that's what's taxing the CPU. And again, since I am a dumbass, I actually recorded this 2 times and I went on an entire rant as to why the CPU requirements were so weird before realizing that when we move to a higher preset, we are going to bump up things like geometry and tessellation. I don't think tessellation is handled by the CPU, but things like geometry which are going to stress the CPU. So yeah, I'm a big dumbass. Now as far as RAM is concerned, you need 16 GB. If you're gaming at 1440p, of course you need 16 GB nowadays. So yeah, because of the textures and all that. No, not textures. What do you actually need? But anyway, you do need 16 GB. That's all I know. As far as the operating system and storage goes, they are going to remain the same pretty much throughout anyway. Now we move on to Ultra, and there is one mistake in Ultra, and that is actually what started my rant, but then I went on into a stupid tangent. But there is a mistake with this, and I'll get to that. So now at 4K, they are only targeting 30 FPS now, because they are also going for the ultra high preset, which I'm assuming is about as much as the engine can handle without absolutely breaking down. So this is the absolute best quality image you can get. So at 4K it makes sense because they are not actually using the newer cards for this PC spec chart. Because you won't see a 3080 or a 3070 here, which is a bummer. So on the AMD side of it, they stick with the same GPU, which again begs the question, if this GPU is running 1440p at 60 FPS, how is it then running 4K 30 FPS at a higher setting? Surely it would drop frames. So yeah, that is one thing that kind of weirded me out. But the next thing is exceptionally weird, because for Ultra, at like literally ultra high settings at 4K, we are using an RTX 2080. Now an RTX 2080 is not a slow card by any sense of the imagination. But we were using a 2080 Super for very high preset at 60 FPS. So how is it that on Ultra, we are using a slower GPU at 4K? I cannot make any sense of it. Unless and otherwise they missed they forgot to add a TI at the end, and it's actually supposed to be an RTX 2080 Ti. Other than that, this list doesn't actually make sense. Or another mistake that could have happened is that they were supposed to put the RTX 2080 in the enthusiast spec and the 2080 Super in the ultra spec. That would also make sense. Now moving on to the CPU, now we also see another small bump. Now we need an Ryzen 7 3700X or an Intel i7 9700K. And this is actually where I started going off on that tangent, but I would like to say these specs still kind of feel off to me. Because, okay, you know what? You go from very high to ultra preset, you are probably going to tax the CPU slightly more with some more calculations, that's fine. But if you're running a game at 60 FPS on a 3600, then I do not think in any circumstance you would need a higher or a better CPU to run the game at 30 FPS. Surely the CPU can keep up, even if you slightly bump up the settings. I don't understand why they recommend going from a 3600X to a 3700X, even though a 3700X is has a lot more cores and a lot more threads than a 3600X. It doesn't make much sense to me. On the Intel side, actually it remains pretty much the same, because it went from an 8700K to a 9700K, and on the Intel side of things, honestly, there isn't much of a performance improvement. As far as RAM is concerned, again, 16 gigs of RAM, OS and storage remains the same. So yeah, that's basically all we have from the specs. I'm slightly confused by the Ultra spec, some of it doesn't make much sense. But yeah, so far it's good. I'm probably going to run the game at 900p at slightly higher frames, at like 45-ish frames. At 900p, that would be acceptable amount of quality for me. So again, that's just me. If you are someone who just saw these specs and you are like, I am so screwed because my PC is sure as hell not going to run this, I am here to the rescue, guys. You can just watch my channel. And so again, I would like to tell you to subscribe to my channel. And also like this video, because you know, once you subscribe to my channel and I see the count go up, it makes me feel better about myself, because God knows I don't really have much reason for that. So yeah, that's basically all I want to say for this video. Stay tuned, all the other videos are also coming. I will stay up as late as it takes. I am going to put these videos out tonight. I have to. And if you are hearing some amount of noise, unfortunately it's raining pretty heavily outside, so that's kind of messing with my noise cancellation thing. So yeah, I'll leave you guys with it. These are the detailed specs. Read it. I'll give you 5 more seconds, maybe pause it, read the entire chart, and peace.